Hello, my friends. This is another Astrological Voyages show, and I'm very happy because today I have a great friend and a great astrologer that I met when I was traveling. And this is Margaret Grey from Ireland and Italy.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Christos, for remembering that. Most people say the Dublin part and not the Italy part. So thank you. And it's a real joy to be with you here this evening. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for you, it's around 11 p.m. right now. For me,
Yes.
it's 1 a.m., but at least
You're still awake.
and this is the next day for me. So I would like to make you some questions. Of course, your expertise about astropsychology. So I'm going, and you are a psychotherapist too.
Yes.
And you have a site, right? Before I start, do you have a
I
site?
do. I do have two www.astrologypsychological.com and also relationshipsandastrology.com. So because of course I work mostly also with relationships.
Okay, okay. So you can people just go around and this what really happens in those two sides. So having also a lot of clients sometimes, especially during the situation, may have a lot of fear, may have a problem in handling situations, and they don't feel really well. What are you telling them?
Well, the first thing I'm doing, Christos, is really to give people a general overview of the bigger picture. And of course, I don't tend to use astrological terms if they're not astrologers, but just to give them really a sense of what's going on generally in the collective, that this is something bigger than them. And also then looking at how does it impact them directly. So it's the bigger picture and the smaller picture. The other thing I always pay attention to, and I'm sure you do too as a therapist, is what developmental period of their life are they in? Because it's very different, if they're in their first Saturn return, or maybe they're at the end of their midlife transits, or in their Chiron return. So what I'm trying to help them figure out is what is their role right now in what is going on in the skies, and what can they learn from it, so that they kind of begin to get a grasp of, okay, this isn't just some general chaos that's happening, I can partake in this. So I think that's very important. The third thing I also look at is what is the resilience, where is the resilience in their
Hmm.
chart, because I think that's the crucial thing, really. So I'm looking at their emotional resilience, their moon, the aspects to their moon, their mental resilience, the aspects to Mercury, also their Mars. So I'm really looking at what are the strengths that they can draw on at this point in time.
Okay. I think that's very interesting because sometimes we miss the point. We try to look all these different details and different methods sometime in a chart, and we are losing the basic things and the most important, the heart of the chart. So I read in a in the recent time that the Western world has a very much increased in phobias and various types of phobias. And of course, being secluded, that also increases all these times, all these things about phobia we have. So, for example, how we can spot an anxiety disorder, or how we can understand a phobia that comes around a chart, and how you can um, how you discuss that with the person that comes to your office.
That's an interesting thing. And I think, one of the things I'm sure you've noticed as well with your clients is that the level of anxiety has gone high. And I think for anybody with a predisposition to anxiety, this is a particularly challenging time for many. I don't believe we're born with innate fears or necessarily innate anxiety, but I think we certainly develop them through life. We may have a predisposition. I think we all have vulnerabilities. And so, usually I look back to attachment issues. So I'm looking really at the moon. For example, moon in aspect to Uranus, I think there is that, predisposition to some abandonment anxiety. So I really look at, moon Neptune tends to be a little bit more overwhelmed and emotional issues coming up, a lot of sensitivity, a lot of empathy that can create really an anxiety that can be hard to separate. Is this my anxiety, or is this, other people's anxiety that I'm picking up? Um, So I'm really looking at what's going on with the moon. Also, I think it depends on the nature of the whole chart. You know, I think very airy and fiery charts need a lot of space and freedom. And so at this time, when people are told you cannot go out, you know, you're constricted to a small space, maybe with people that they don't even particularly get on well with, or who they're not used to being with 24/7. I think that can create quite a bit more anxiety than maybe charts that, you know, a very earthy chart that might be quite comfortable with its routine and doing some cooking and doing some gardening and so on, and or a very watery chart that, as long as it's got some kind of contact with others, maybe even Zoom calls or phone calls or whatever. So they're really the kind of things I look at. I mean, what about you? Is there anything else that you would look at in terms of phobias, do you think, and anxiety?
Well, I think you hit the basic. I think, yes, moon, of course, is one of the most basic factors in to understand what really happens. And of course, the whole of the chart is what really tells us the story. Of course, we look at Mercury in order to understand the cognitive functions of the brain. Yes, I think that you're spot on. And that is, of course, there is much more. We cannot say that in an
Yes.
interview, but
Yes.
we really spot on the basics.
We'd be
And
here all week, I think, Christos, if we were to go into it, because there's so many factors, aren't there,
it needs
really?
seminars to seminars
Yes,
and
yes,
channel
yes.
conversation. And except from the anxiety disorders, because of the quarantine, we can see, I told you also before, for example, in Greece, we have a 30% increase of aggressive situation and battering within houses. And I think that problems with aggressiveness is a main thing, not now, but also before, but right now, because of the quarantine, all these have been increased. So how you deal with aggressiveness, and how you deal with aggressiveness in a very specific way when the victim comes, or especially when the victim comes perhaps with a relationship chart with the person that performs this kind of abuse.
You know, I used to work for Women's Aid in the UK, Christos, many years ago, and I staffed the helpline there. So I certainly remember, you know, there are a lot of issues around domestic violence. And I think at the moment, as you say, people are in lockdown. And so sometimes, unfortunately, in homes where there is a lot of domestic abuse. You know, I mean, the first thing is obviously to help find a way for the person to get out. That's just the basic thing, of course. In terms of dealing with it, you know, and trying to understand what's going on, you know, there's such an abuse of power. The whole dynamic is about power. So if I were to look at the chart, if a spouse were to bring me their chart of their partner who has been abusive to them, and by the way, that's the one time where I will look at a spouse's chart without permission from the spouse. Other than that, I wouldn't. But if there's a danger to life for one or other, you know, the kind of configurations I've seen, and these are generalizations because, of course, people jump and think, I have that in my chart, my goodness, am I violent? But, you know, first of all, it's all about consciousness of our chart. And we all know that configurations can be lived out at their most expansive or at their most limited. And I think when there are configurations like very powerful Mars, Pluto, Saturn aspects in the chart, then there can be, if they are not lived out consciously in terms of the individual empowering themselves and consciously living out that enormous amount of ability to create change in the world, then it can implode internally and there can be a sense of disempowerment, and which can come out as aggression. I think also, you know, Pluto in the seventh house or Mars in the seventh house, again, it can be projected if it's not, you know, really lived out, internalized and integrated into the psyche. So Mars in the seventh really needs people around them there can be a sparring with, you know, a debating with. But if that Mars is suppressed or repressed or really not lived out well, then it can come out as aggression, I think, towards another person. You know, we all know that fire can be more direct. So a Mercury in fire can speak sometimes without thinking. Again, somebody who's not very conscious can just blurt out things that can be, you know, very, very aggressive without really much consideration. But also another facet that we don't often give attention to is passive aggressiveness, you know, which is that kind of the silences, the sulks where couples don't talk.
Point.
Yes, couples don't talk for
and
months.
When usually your victim is not the victim, and perhaps there is a whole situation that comes like a ping pong between two people, and how you manage that. This is difficult.
I think it's very difficult. I think for that, I do look at things like, you know, Taurus can be very stubborn. So planets in Taurus can get very entrenched. So, you know, I'm right and you're wrong. And until you apologize, I'm not going to speak to you. Moon and water signs, particularly Cancer, can be very moody and sulky, and Cancer even on the ascendant. So really, I'm always looking in charts for how can those aspects be lived out at their very best. Mm-hmm. So how can the person integrate them so that they can, but the difficulty is, of course, that people who are acting out and behaving like that often don't have the willingness to do that. So I think for us as astrologers, what we can do is explain to the partner maybe some of what's going on, look at the synastry with their chart, what's been triggered off, and the composite, and then really support them in maybe just really leaving, because unless that person comes to us, in all my years of working, I have had, I think, maybe one person who came to me and actually shared that they were the aggressor. In every other situation, it's always been the partner. Yeah. So generally, they're not likely to come really to us. So it's very difficult to work with them. We can only work with their family members and help them to understand this is what's going on with the person, and you have a choice in this, unless they're willing to go for therapy. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing is also we're kind of, back into the lunar, the lunar aspects, in terms of if the partner who is in a situation of domestic violence is struggling to leave, they're in that trauma bond. And what's that trauma bond? Maybe, a Moon Pluto aspect that was lived out in a challenging way in childhood, or sometimes even a Sun Pluto aspect, so what is the partner projecting? Why are they in that situation? Why have they stayed in that situation? And it's easier said than done. I mean, I know through working with, people in domestic violence that cycle, it's an addiction cycle. And years ago, I did a talk for the San Francisco Astrological Society on relationships and addictions. And that's really what we explored. What is behind? And addictions vary enormously. There can be Neptunian addictions or Plutonian addictions. So it's a very complex area.
Yeah, and I think that is very interesting that you mentioned also Pluto, because I was going to ask you how Pluto plays its role in manipulating and having control of the other, not just by a single chart, but also as a synastry. So we can expect Mars and we can expect Pluto to play an important role. Also, what I would like also to ask you that, do you see any Uranus as being an instant aggressor or something that comes up like a thunderstorm and then goes out?
In my experience, Uranus is more a sudden ending. It's more that somebody disappears. Mm-hmm. So, the partner that is here one day, gone the next, and has had enough, doesn't want commitment, doesn't take responsibility, doesn't do anything. I haven't seen it so much in terms of physical or emotional aggression. I think Uranus just runs out the door, it's gone. So it's more that unpleasant surprise of the ground kind of opens and they're here 1 minute and gone the next, or that the partner is left like with what happened there, what did I do? So there's that suddenness, but I haven't. Have you seen it a lot with aggression?
No, because it's a discussion in Greece that sometimes Uranus is performing some kind of an instant aggression or something like shocking behavior that then is not, again, let's say, it's not repeated. That's why I'm asking because there is also talk around in the Greek scene, and I'm doing also ask questions from what we discuss in Greece. And The other one, we talk about anxiety disorders, we talk about aggressiveness, and of course there are aspects between the charts showing this aggressiveness. And of course there is the disease of the 21st century, which is depression. And this is the big one. Depression is the biggest problem that comes, and a lot of our clients have depression and sometimes do not even know it. That is, I think, the most critical problem. And how you support and how you communicate that, because usually, especially men, because our clientele that comes from men has the problem to accept that they are having a depression, probably because, you know, it's all this Western archetype of being strong and not need any help, and I do not cry because I'm the man and all that stuff. How do you deal that all things?
You know, I usually ask people how they deal with their anger. That's kind of my starting point, because really what I want to explore is Mars. To me, Mars is key in depression, because Mars is our life force. It's our chi energy, you know, and I often say to people, you know, think of the Mars return. Think of a 2-year-old child and they have a tantrum in the middle of a store. And really what they're doing is they're asserting themselves. They're learning to say no to the world so they can say yes to themselves. And unless that stage is handled well by parents, which very few parents do because they often haven't worked through their own Mars, I think it's very difficult for them to learn to really contain the child. And so the child learns how to appreciate and contain their anger and their own life force. So that's usually my starting point. And that often opens things up, because a lot of people will say, oh, I never get angry, or I don't know what anger is, or I get very angry. So once they start doing that, I can begin to explore with them what Mars is about. And I can look at the Mars, you know, like Mars in water can struggle a lot because it's very good at having empathy for other people, but it can really struggle at defending itself, because it goes into that kind of like, oh, that poor person, you know, goodness, they're such a good person. How can I be angry with them? And so that anger kind of goes right back in. So it protects other people. Earth Mars also can have problems because the anger can get stored in the body. It's like, you know, it doesn't always just come out. And also Mars in Earth is very good at working through its anger in terms of working hard. Say, for example, Mars in Capricorn, probably the hardest working Mars in the zodiac. It just keeps going. It just keeps going. And so it's, you know, kind of traditional workaholics, for want of a better word, often that Mars in Capricorn, and there's no time to figure out, actually, I'm feeling pretty lousy. I think the most important thing with Mars is that Mars needs movement, and depression is often the suppression of that Mars energy, the repression, the depression. So I usually say to people, you know, are you getting enough movement? And I think that's one of the things with the current lockdown, that in a way, funnily enough, I don't know if you're noticing this, that actually anxiety levels are higher than depression. Because a lot of people who tend to self-isolate, now everyone is isolating, so they're not on their own anymore. And people who tend to be at home thinking everyone's out having a party, now they're thinking, well, everyone's at home, no one's having a party. So I'm seeing a lot of people who were depressed before actually kind of perking up. It's almost like this is, we're all in the same boat, whereas the anxiety level is going through the roof. But I think the lockdown is making people think, I need to move, I need to have a walk. So even if it's once a day, even if it's just walking around the house or running or doing exercises. Also, I think expression is very important, back to Mercury. So singing is great for people who are depressed. I think one of the things with depression at the moment is a lot of issues are coming up for people. And so at the moment, that's the flip side of it, that even though some people are feeling better, also there are a lot of issues. So maybe people who before didn't think they were depressed, you know, I'm hearing clients now say to me, gosh, I think I might be depressed. I'm struggling getting out of bed in the morning. Whereas before they would have been such hard workers, they would have got up very early, they had their routine. So I think that's really the thing. You know, it's really, also, the other thing that's coming up for people is, social media. People are posting photos of having wonderful Zoom calls with their families and stuff, which I also did. Of course we do it, but I think that can be hard for people if they don't have connections, because then their fantasy is, oh my goodness, these people have all these loving people that love them and care about them.
Exactly.
And I could die and nobody would care about me.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm doing with clients is really exploring, what is it that you envy? What is it that you'd like, and how can we work with your Mars so that when this is over, you can really work towards it? So really to reframe it so that people can do something constructive with their energy, but mostly to move. I think dancing is fabulous.
Great, thank you. And after all this depression, anxiety disorder, and aggressiveness, because of this quarantine and this kind of virus, a lot of people find a new problem, that a lot of things that they were working around, they are really so important. They said that the biggest hit was against Instagram, because there is no fabulous smiles according to, very expensive wines and all this kind of use of this Instagram way of being gorgeous and being like a star. Nothing is important like that right now with this virus. So there are some specific existential problems right now to the clients. So we have another point right now that comes up, like what I am doing, why I am now here, and what is my purpose, and all of this doesn't have any meaning, and how I can use it. Of course, this is a door for anxiety and depression, but also this is a door of self-exploration.
Yes, it is. And, I always think back to Viktor Frankl, and logotherapy and his, his amazing work with, in terms of dealing with the existential problems of life that he experienced within the confines of a concentration camp. So I think, his work is really amazing, and I would recommend anyone to read his books. But, he really highlighted the importance of meaning, as the philosophers have done for centuries, that unless we have meaning in life, why are we here? So I think this is very fundamental. And I think with astrology, we are in a position to help clients to find meaning through their chart, that, they are a uniquely important part of this whole puzzle of life, and that they are invaluable, and mostly that they're invaluable because of who they are and not what they do. And so even sitting at home and doing nothing, they're still playing their part. So I think this is a wonderful thing, wonderful time to do that, and for people to really start asking themselves, why am I here? And what is my reason for being here? And what is my purpose? And of course, we can look at the sun in the chart, the nodes in the chart. And then the next thing that, of course, Viktor Frankl said, in terms of people working with existential things, is what can we do to contribute? Because we've lived in a society, we live in a culture which is very much about, what do I want? What do I need? What can I grab? What can I grasp? Rather than, what can I give you? What can I offer you? And I think when we start doing that, which enormous amounts of people have been doing it around the world at the moment, I mean, what the health professionals and frontline workers alone are doing.
Yes.
That's really a learning in itself. So I think our hearts are opening, and we're realizing, gosh, there's even something small I can do. Maybe bringing out the garbage for a neighbor because they can't do it, or just smiling at somebody, just saying hello to somebody. So I think that's the amazing part of it. So basically to realize that we are part of the solution, and that we all have a part to play.
I think that's the most important. And usually we forget of that giving energy, and we need to collect and collect and collect, and not just then. We don't collect energy, we collect just material things that make us more empty. And a lot of occupations change, a lot of occupations are going to be transformed because of this virus. So my question is, how is going to change the way we work as astrologers?
My hope is that there be less egos and more service. That's really my hope. and also more equality, that I think there'll be a recognition that, it's not about being a movie star somewhere. It's actually about quality of what we can offer people. It's back to what can we offer. And of course, my Virgo ascendant would say that, but really, how can we be of service? And I think it's up to us to really tune into the collective and really take stock of what is needed right now, rather than how do I fancy being famous right now. So that's my hope. What do you think, Christoph?
I think that's the main problem, and I can see that clearly in Greece also, that some astrologers are transforming themselves into like pop stars, or like oh, look at me, I know everything, we have a fairy tale here, like everyone knows everything. And this is a problem, because astrology is getting hurt in reality through all this, because it's about being humble, it's about understanding the language of the universe. You are a translator of a universal language, of a universal information. And I think we're really spot on that, because that's the problem of modern astrology. We are going into like being like Madonnas, or like, I have the first hit and I am the best and all that.
Yes.
And it is like, like doing psychology or doing something in service. It's about being humble and understanding the importance of this work, and that we are servants of that thing. But I think that's a really big change. I think that's going to happen, and I hope it will happen soon.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think also to be aware that it's not just about guessing. People, it's almost like a competition. I guessed when the coronavirus was starting, I'm going to guess when it's going to end. And actually, it's like, that's all well and good, but actually in between that, people need help to keep going. And so we need to also be aware that our words have an impact on people, and to really think carefully what is the impact. So I think really I'm hoping that more astrologers will also train in things like basic counseling skills, the basic psychology, just an understanding, because we're working with people, we're working at a deep level, and they're being affected emotionally. So it's important that people have that knowledge.
Yeah. Because after all, it's about having empathy and understanding what really happens. Because astrologer needs to have empathy in order to.
Yes.
It's a basic tool, guys.
Absolutely, exactly. Yes.
And always the protagonist, the first role, is the client. It's not the astrologer.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not about you. It's about the other that's coming to you. And of course, you can see sometimes some people that are like they are acting to you like being Mel Gibson, or like an actor, and oh, I love you. You are so great, and all. And it's really weird.
Yes,
it's really
that's not what it's about. It's really, as you said very accurately, we are servants. We are offering something. It's a sixth house task. That's really what it is.
Exactly. If you want to shine, choose another occupation.
Yeah, go be an actor. Yeah, go on stage. I mean, that's wonderful, but that's not astrology.
Yeah, I think we spot on that. Yes, I think the most important. My next two questions are going to be about two important cycles that are going to happen in the next months. The first, it's about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I'm not going to ask you about the mundane level of that, but I'm going to ask you what you expect from a conjunction of those two planets in the 0 degree of Aquarius, and the starting point of the era of the air, and what that means for our psychology.
I think it's so interesting because, when you put Jupiter and Saturn together, you've got expansion and contraction. But I think the positive side of that is that the Saturn can help manifest the Jupiter expansion. And also Jupiter is about a sense of meaning. And in Aquarius, it's very idealistic and it's very egalitarian. So the potential is there to really, really try and create a society, a world where there aren't marginalized groups, where actually we're all equal. Now, we all know, of course, that the kind of extreme of that is where it gets very rigid and very tunnel vision. This is the perfect way to be. So I think we really need to be careful to balance mind and heart, so that we need to have compassion and to try and give some flexibility, because it's not a very flexible aspect. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's very interesting because we're coming out of the last 200 years where the conjunctions, of course, were in Earth. So it was all about structures, all about kind of those solid entities. Now we're in the realm of the mind, and we're in a time where it's all about computers, online. So I think in terms of our dynamics, we're likely to be online a lot more. You know, people have realized they can work online, so why would they bother going and sitting in an office? What we have to be careful about is that we don't isolate too much. And again, remember the heart level, the physical level, that we also need physical contact with people. So I think we're going to be, you know, the initial stage is always the adjusting, the kind of first taster of what's going to happen. And there can be a detached quality about it. So I would say for anybody, particularly with very airy charts already, to really keep themselves grounded in their body, on the earth, and in their heart, so that there is that mixture of that heart-mind connection. I mean, that's really my sense. Certainly, it's amazing for technology. I think we could have amazing innovations, you know, amazing ways of being. But to remember that, you know, we're physical creatures. We also need a hug. That's what we're all missing, that physical contact. So if we're just in our heads and if we're just creating robots, we're going to miss out on something. That's my thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the main problem. I have a very, very airy chart. Okay. A very, very airy chart. Everything is in the air. And I think that this is always a problem with the science, so that the charts that have a lot of air, we do not have the roots very deep, and sometimes we lead ourselves, and this is having problems in our health matter. Sometimes we have problems with the health, some psychosomatic things that happen, and because of this technological stuff that we are going to start from this weird cycle, I think that we really need to understand that, yes, innovation and new technological things that are going to broaden our cognitive situation and way of thinking may be good, but we need to be grounded, not to lose our humanity, not to lose that we are having human bodies and we are part of Earth also.
I think I mean, I've no air in my chart, by the way, so it's so funny with you with a lot of air, and I've no air. But you know, so this is going to blow my head off when it comes in this transit. But I do think that it's you know, it's such an idealistic and it's such a collective transit. I think that the plus side is really the realization that actually we are all entitled to the same rights. Mm-hmm. So I think that is the aspect that's really going to be wonderful, hopefully, for us, that we're going to realize we can't keep having these inequalities. And I think the whole COVID issue is bringing that to the forefront. Mm-hmm. That, you know, I put a post on Facebook the other day, we're not all this in the same way. We're not all in this together. Some people are living in mansions or castles with, you know, enough grounds to like a park so they can isolate in luxury, and other people are lying on a cardboard box in the street. So I think with this conjunction, we can't hide from that anymore. We really have to face that. It's not anymore sparkly and shiny. The box get out and you see the main product. Yes. So I'm going to ask you also about not Jupiter Pluto that we are going right now. I'm going to ask you about the Saturn Uranus cycle that comes up in February 2021. So it's within the year, 12 months. And what is that also going to affect our psychology? I think that's a particularly interesting one because, of course, because I do a lot of work on relationships, I'm particularly interested in that one because that's more also our intimate or close relationships. So I think there's going to be a big upheaval. There's a big upheaval in terms of our values, big upheaval, I think, in terms of finances, relationships. Again, I think it's really those two planets can work together. You know, that the Saturn, I'm a lover of Saturn, maybe because I have Saturn square my sun, so I live with Saturn. But I think Saturn at its best can really help us manifest something rather than just talk about it. So I'm hopeful that the change, the enlightenment that is coming with Uranus and Taurus Saturn can help to manifest that at its best. So that's really what I'm hoping. And again, back to the element of compassion, you know, I think there could also be some changes on the planet. I think probably changes around also how we live, our homes. You know, we live in a society where people usually buy their property or rent properties. But again, there's this huge, you know, disparity between how different people live. So I think we're also going to rethink maybe the concept of living in homes with family or living with friends. So how do we want our homes to be? And again, COVID will have an impact on that because people in isolation on their own are going to start thinking, well, you know, if I don't have a shop beside me or whatever, and then people living with other people might think, oh my goodness, I could be stuck with these people again, you know. So I think it's really making us challenge, what does home mean? You know, all of those Taurian values we're really kind of thinking about, you know, and our sense of self-value. What am I basing my value on? My career? Or am I basing it on who I am as a person and the people I love? I think, you know, ultimately the whole concept of what love is about is really going to be questioned, you know, and I think, again, this COVID is really making us think, who are the people who are there for me? If I'm lying on my deathbed on a respirator, who am I going to be thinking about, you know? And it may not be the people we thought before. And who are the people calling us and saying, are you okay? And who are the people we're calling and saying, are you okay? So I think this might bring some of that to a head where something really needs to change and manifest. So it's a very exciting time. I mean, we're living in amazing times where I think this, in a way, maybe I think for many of us as astrologers, really started with the Uranus-Pluto square in 2012 to 2015. And we knew from there that this was the time we'd all been waiting for. And so we knew this was going to happen in our lifetime. And I think it's quite amazing that it is. And, you know, we have an important part to play, all of us, in finding our niche, our role to help us get through this, you know, in the most conscious way.
And I think that is really important to say it again. Every single astrologer, since I remember myself, was saying always about what is going to happen from 2010 till 2024. This was the 14 years that we expected the most. And it was the most basic, I think, thing that every astrologer was saying, that is going something to change. And we can see that change. Of course, sometimes, you know, the population wants from us to tell them that on that day of that month, on the specific time, there is going to be a virus that is going to be named COVID-19, that is going to... We cannot do that. We cannot do that.
No, we can't. We're working with energies. And I think that's what I always say to clients. It's like, we're working with the energies. We're working with the flow. And we can tell you the texture of them and ways you can work with that. But the actual, particularly when it involves Uranus, I mean, it's always expect the unexpected.
Exactly. What about your personal life? Your professional personal life? What are you...
My Scorpio moon for a second was going...
No. I'm not going to change the way of the show. I'm not going to become like that. Or if I'm a double Gemini, you never know. So what are you doing right now in your job, and what are your plans?
You know, I have two strands to my work. There's my individual work that I do with clients, my consultation, psychological astrology, which I do here and online, I've done for many years. And then there's the strand of the relationship work, which is really focused on relationships and astrology. And at the moment, my colleague Armand and I are running a online 1-year certificate course in relationships and astrology.
Great.
This is our last term, and we've got some wonderful guest speakers. We've got Nadia Shan, Linda Foriati, and Rick Levine, Christopher Renstrom, Rachel Lang. And we're really doing this last term is going to be a whole package of talks on very specific areas of relationships, like Linda's doing addictions and relationships. And then we're going to be selling also just the term alone if people want. And just to let people know, we've actually, you know, halved the price of it because I know everybody is struggling financially. So, you know, don't let the cost put you off is what I'm saying. But so hopefully next September, this has been our first year running it. We've learned a lot from running it the first year, what works, what doesn't work. And next year we'll be able to, you know, launch it again, maybe with some changes. And, you know, it's evolving, so it changes. But, you know, we keep putting blogs up every day on our relationship and astrology page. And that's really the area that I'm most passionate about. Mm-hmm. So I just love the whole issue of dynamics, you know, relationship dynamics. So, yes.
Tell again the URL to the people.
I'm sorry?
The URL, the HTTPS.
relationships-and-astrology.com.
Okay.
Yes, they can contact us through that.
Any kind of book?
You know, I'm still editing a book that I've been writing for 7 years, so I'm embarrassed to even mention that. If I that's my plan during the COVID, but you know, the best laid plans. Armand, of course, wrote his book Separating Aspects, which is fabulous, several years ago. So that's really what's in the pipeline at the moment. So yes, watch this space, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. It was a really pleasure to having you. Really
wonderful to be here. Thank you, Christos, for inviting me, and I hope to see you in person again soon.
And I have to say to the people, of course, that our communication is a little turbulent because we had the problem of canceling things, and that was from my from my personal life. So it was like having some kind of problem with Margaret, and I was canceling things all the time just with her. It was, I thought one day, oh my God, she's going to think that I'm a horrible person, not having any kind of empathy, not having any kind of respect to the program of the other. Everything that we've done with Margaret, we tried to do with Margaret in the previous month was cancelled, and it was like, oh my God, so we've made it.
We made it, that's right, because Astrology Ireland, I forgot to mention that. I also co-run Astrology Ireland with my colleague John Byrne, and our meetings are online at the moment. But yes, you were going to actually come to Ireland and talk to us, and sadly you got sick, but we were just saying maybe it was a godsend, because then of course the whole COVID thing came up, and who knows how safe airports were. So maybe it's about just trusting the universe anyway, that you know, things kind of work out. So, but we made it, and hopefully we'll make it again. We'll be able to do something else again soon. Christos, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
If you have any questions, you can write down the video, and Margaret can answer to you. So if everything you want, you can just type your question, and we will be here. Again, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.